Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to the Lepanto Institute's Anchor Team. I'm your host, Michael Hitchborn, and we've got a very interesting show for you this evening. First and foremost, we have breaking news that we're going to get into right at the top of the show. There are other developments, things going on. One of the things that I want to let you in on, I've got a couple of secret projects that we're working on here at the Lepanto Institute, but before we get into any of that, we are going to say our regular prayer. And joining me to say the regular prayer is not our usual co host, Andy O'Neill, not a guest star from across the pond, but my very own lovely, beautiful bride, Alyssa Hitchborn, is joining us this evening. So, this is my wife, Alyssa, whom I've wanted to have on the show for such a long time. I'm so happy she's here. So let's go ahead and start with our prayer. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory.
Pray for us.
In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Okay, so because we are both operating from the same stream into the internet, there's a little bit of a delay, so that's okay. Just want to make everybody aware that we know that there's a delay and there's not much we can do about it. So, in any event, we're going to go ahead and hit the pavement running and start talking about the giant elephant that jumped into the middle of the swimming pool this afternoon. Archbishop Cordileone announced that he was banning Nancy Pelosi from receiving Holy Communion. My wife will remember when I was working for American Life League, 10 years ago now, I actually took a trip out to San Francisco and I met with Archbishop Cordileone to talk to him specifically about implementing Canon 915 and barring Nancy Pelosi from Holy Communion. He was very gracious and he acknowledged that there was an issue that needed to be addressed. It's taken him 10 years, but thanks be to God, it's finally done.
Well, I think he spent the last 10 years reaching out to her privately in the hopes that she would repair the scandal by repenting and, withdrawing herself from promoting it. But since she has doubled down, in his own words, it's her vehement advocacy for abortion that finally led him to taking this step.
Right. I want to read really quickly from the letter that he sent to her, which he made public this afternoon. The opening of the letter, obviously, it gives a lot of background. It talks about what the Second Vatican Council says in Gaudium et Spes about the preeminence of abortion being an issue and the crime of infanticide and abortion. He talked about the document on the constancy in receiving Holy Communion that came out recently. He talked about what Cardinal Ratzinger said in 2004 about the importance of denying communion to those who are promoting abortion. And so then this is what he says. These are his words to Nancy Pelosi. He says, "In striving to follow this direction, I am grateful to you for the time that you have given me in the past to speak about these matters. Unfortunately, I have not received such an accommodation to my many requests to speak to you once again. You vowed to codify the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision in federal law following upon the passage of the Texas Senate Bill 8 last September. That is why I communicated my concerns to you via letter on April 7, 2022, and informed you that should you not publicly repudiate your advocacy for abortion rights," and he put rights in quotes, "or else refrain from referring to your Catholic faith in public and receiving Holy Communion, I would have no choice but to make a declaration in keeping with Canon 915 that you are not to be admitted to Holy Communion. As you have publicly repudiated your position on abortion and continue to refer to your Catholic faith, or not publicly repudiated your position on abortion, and continue to refer to your Catholic faith in justifying your position and to receive Holy Communion, that time has now come. Therefore, in light of my responsibility as the Archbishop of San Francisco to be concerned for all the Christian faithful entrusted to my care, Code of Canon Law 383, paragraph 1, by means of this communication, I am hereby notifying you that, and he put all this in bold, you are not to present yourself for Holy Communion, and should you do so, you are not to be admitted to Holy Communion until such time as you publicly repudiate your advocacy for the legitimacy of abortion and confess and receive absolution for this grave sin in the sacrament of penance. Alyssa, your thoughts?
Well, I think he is taking obviously a pastoral step versus, I don't really think he's attacking it as a canon lawyer, even though he is one. I think he's looking at it like, how do I get her back to the sacrament? I mean, I have to repair the scandal, but he has a very obvious concern for her soul. And I don't think he wants to push it as far as it could go, i.e. excommunication. He really wants to see if this will bring her back. I know a lot of people might say that the scandal she's caused warrants, a stiffer sort of response from him and that it's long overdue. But I actually have to admire him for having this deep concern for this public sinner to bring her back. I mean, we're talking about her eternal soul as well as the other people she scandalized, of course. But if she were to come back, I think that was just a monumental,
Yeah. So it's very interesting when you look at this from the standpoint of a pastor who is trying to bring back a lost sheep, because that's honestly, as a bishop, that's his responsibility, that's his role. On the other hand, Nancy Pelosi is not only advocating for the slaughter of the innocents, but she is also leading others into the sin of thinking that this is okay. Because as she professes her Catholic faith, as she continues to receive Holy Communion, the sin of scandal weighs heavily on her soul. And I can only imagine how Archbishop Cordileone must have wrestled with his own conscience in seeing her continue to profess her Catholic faith and continue to receive Holy Communion while pushing for abortion as a so-called right.
Well, he said that he has prayed and fasted about it for years, and that in fact, it has weighed heavily upon his conscience for a long time what to do. But I think that by doing this, he's actually laying the groundwork for further sanctions should they become necessary, which in her case, they probably will.
Well, exactly. I mean, for one thing, her promotion isn't just about abortion. Her promotions are also in favor of contraception. Her promotions are also in favor of same-sex marriage. Her promotions are also in favor of the LGBT community and also in favor of transgenderism and promoting transgenderism to children. She's also in favor, on the record, of promoting homosexual adoption of young kids, which all of these things, she's just dripping in scandal. So it's the abortion. I don't want to call it an issue because it's a real moral thing. It's murder. But abortion is just one aspect of the multitude of scandalous actions and I would dare say heresies that are festering in her soul. So I wonder how much. I mean, obviously, abortion is one of the most out there, but do you think that there's ever going to be a point in the history of the church when bishops say that, well, advocacy for same-sex marriage or advocacy for some of these other gravely sinful matters are also to be, individuals are to be denied Holy Communion for those?
I mean, well, one would hope so. Obviously, manifest public sinners should not be receiving the Eucharist with making it seem like that's perfectly okay to do so. I mean, the church is pretty clear about that. The application of it being open to interpretation of the bishops. But maybe, I don't know, maybe if he takes down Pelosi with the abortion issue, it could cause a cascade effect upon the other moral issues. Maybe it will help embolden some bishops to start standing up and defending the body of Christ properly, in a way that maybe they've neglected for many years.
One can hope. Now, you were reading to me an interview that he had done with American Magazine in relation to what Pelosi was doing and his decision to enact these sanctions against Pelosi. What did you learn from this interview?
Well, that he certainly is a bit. He definitely is a lawyer for sure. Some of his answers were, politically circumspect, shall we say, not giving away more than he needed to. But then in others, it's pretty clear, though, that I think that he still feels a bit conflicted on the topic. I think that he certainly is in the camp where he believes that it's possible for politicians to be involved in legislation, providing that it seeks to reduce abortion, even if the legislation itself isn't an outright, like seeking an outright ban on abortion. And I know that there's some controversy about that in the pro-life community, whether you can do stuff like that. He did say in his interview that he's spoken to Wilton Gregory about Pelosi in the past, that the cardinal is aware. But he left it at that. He didn't say anything else.
That's a very short answer for a lot of.
Yes, but listening to his interview again, you get a strong sense that he does have a deep concern for Pelosi's soul, and that maybe he believes that if she can repent, that will help repair the damage of the scandal that she's given over the years. But you do see a shepherd's heart from the interview coming out, like that he does have a deep sense of this, but he actually is urging his Catholics to continue to pray and fast for Pelosi and for the bishops, because he's like, this is just the beginning. It's not over.
So there are actually some people who are saying, well, this really isn't going to have a whole lot of effect because she's just going to go to a different diocese, or she's going to go to, she'll continue to receive under Wilton Gregory. And I do know that in the interview, you mentioned that he was asked specifically about this issue, and he said something to the effect that, and I think you've got the quote, but he said something to the effect that, well, we bishops will all honor the directives imposed by other bishops. Do you recall what he said?
He said something along the lines of, here it is. He said, I suppose there will be a variety of opinions, but I think as bishops, we respect each other's decisions on matters like this. And then he goes on to say, each bishop has to decide in accordance with his conscience in these and other types of situations as well. And they're usually very complex. What good will it do? What evil will it avoid? What might be the side effects? All these things have to wait, and we can come to different prudential judgments using our conscience. Which might sound a little wishy-washy, but he does spend a lot of time talking about like Catholicism 101, and it's kind of like, duh, she's violating a very clear prohibition in the church. So even though that particular part, that quote I just read, might sound a little wishy-washy, he's pretty firm on, these are the basics. You can never do anything that directly takes, where the goal is to directly take an innocent human life.
Sure.
So how you come about, I think what he's talking about there as bishops is, how do you go about talking to your flock about their stances on things? You say, this is wrong, but how do you go about reaching out to them to, get them to hear you? I think that's what he meant by prudential decisions.
Well, it kind of raises a very interesting issue and quite possibly a sticky widget on many fronts. Because when you start thinking about what's going to happen now that she's been barred from communion in the Archdiocese of San Francisco, all the priests know,
Yes.
which means that any priest in the Archdiocese of San Francisco that hands her Holy Communion is now in defiance of his bishop and is subject to suspension. automatically because he's defying the will of the bishop. If she were to go outside the diocese, say to Oakland, which from what I understand, the Bishop of Oakland is actually really good. So perhaps some other diocese nearby, or, while she's in Washington, D.C.
I'd say stick to Washington. That's probably where she'll get it.
Yeah. So she goes to Washington, D.C., and she goes and she receives communion. Now you have an apparent clash between Wilton Gregory and Archbishop Cordileone. And then on top of that, you have Nancy Pelosi actually flouting the dictate of the bishop. And then she's going to do what? To claim that she's still a Catholic in good standing, to claim that she's still a practicing, ardent, faithful Catholic, her words. I'm wondering politically how this plays out.
Well, that's why the America Magazine interviewer made a big point of asking him about it as a political decision with ramifications. And he said, well, it's really sad that is, likely to be what happens. He's like, but he really stressed it was a pastoral decision, at least for his own motivations, that he finally had to come to this juncture because of her, avowed support for abortion, especially doubling down with this Dobbs-Jackson leak. And that he just had to do this as the shepherd to really, her soul was on the line. But he acknowledged that there was going to be political ramifications for it. Sure. I don't even think he might even be prepared for all the things you just said. I mean, is he going to have to start disciplining priests within his own diocese? Maybe he has priests within his own diocese that stand up and say, we don't agree with your decision. What then? What if he starts catching flack from the USCCB or even the Vatican? I mean, we just don't know where it goes. But I think for him, he finally just got to a point where he couldn't live with his conscience any longer.
Right.
And he's going to have to accept what comes.
So obviously within the church, the tension, whatever the tension or however the tension plays out, there is going to be tension. There's going to be friction. I've already seen on Twitter a number of priests, of the Jimmy Martin bent, who are decrying this decision and saying that this isn't fair, that this is a breach of conscience and all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, and taking it just to the political level, now you got your degree in political science just like I did. My focus was on the philosophy stuff. Like I just loved the statecraft and what is the philosophy of governance. But you were very focused and you were much more attuned to political interactions, the way politics plays out and how it is applied. And I wonder how this plays out politically, just in the political landscape. Nancy Pelosi gets up there and she starts talking about abortion, or people, let's just say the first interview that she does, obviously she's going to be asked about this. How do you think she plays it off?
Honestly, I think she's going to say that Archbishop Cordileone is not the entire church and that she's been a good Catholic all these years. She'll brag on her 5 kids again, and she's been a lifelong communicant, et cetera, et cetera. I think that she's just going to try to maybe sideline him, absent any kind of statement from the Vatican, which I don't know. What do you think? Do you think there'll be a statement from the Vatican forthcoming?
Oh, I don't think the Vatican's going to say a word. I think that
Pope Francis, I don't think she's gonna stop then until she hears from the Vatican. I think she's gonna deny Cordileone's ability to control her.
Maybe she'll appeal, say that she's appealing this decision in Rome, and because she disagrees with the Archbishop, and she'll probably, I think, say something. Well, I think that Archbishop Cordileone is and she'll stutter all through the whole thing, but she'll try and paint him as an ideologue who is making politics with the church, and that she has a great amount of respect for him and she respects his office as bishop, but we do disagree on this, and I think that Rome is probably going to side with me, and then she'll chew on her gums for a little while.
Well, either that or she'll just say, well, I'm still allowed communion everywhere else. So he's clearly right. She'll just push him off as just an out of touch, prelate she's going to claim it's about politics, even though he's saying it's pastoral. Like, she's going to claim it's a political swipe. And well, if it was so bad, why isn't Wilton Gregory denying her? If it's so bad, why isn't Joe Biden being denied communion? Why her?
Right.
Why is she being singled out? Oh yeah, I definitely think that she'll try to sideline him in some way.
I wonder, I mean, obviously this does put pressure on the next one. Okay, now that she's been denied communion, what about Bob Casey in Pennsylvania? What about Murkowski out in California? What about Joe Biden, as you pointed out? So now there are all these whataboutisms that are going to be raised by this. And I think the faithful are going to try and put pressure on their bishops, I hope, to get them to do the same thing, because quite honestly, this ongoing scandal has got to stop.
Well, and as Cordileone said, he's not the first one to have done this. He referenced Archbishop Burke before he was cardinal, like when he was still in La Crosse. He mentioned a few others, Bishop Paprocki and several others who, issued these kinds of things against politicians who had this outspoken support for abortion. So he's not the first. It's just that there hasn't, I don't think, in my opinion, that there's been much of it hasn't stuck. Right? Like, you have a few people here and there that do it, and then everybody kind of is on edge for a while. It quiets down, and then it's back to business as usual. And I actually think that's what the Dems are counting on. They really want it to be business as usual. I think people have to keep the pressure up.
I think you're right. I think that that's exactly what their play is to try and, quiet it down, wait to weather the storm, then move on. But I also think that because of the high profile nature of this particular issue, she's Speaker of the House. She's not just some senator or some representative somewhere. She's Speaker of the House. She's fourth or third in line for the presidency. Third. So
yeah. It goes vice president, then her.
Right. So this is not just some lower level political case. This is very high profile. An archbishop of the church has issued this letter. It's now public. It's already on all the major news networks. So they're all talking about this. I think this has the potential to be the spark for what Our Lady of Akita said when she talked about bishops opposing bishops and cardinals being against cardinals. Yes. That now we will definitely see an instance where there are going to be emboldened bishops. I think Archbishop Aquila out in Denver, Colorado could be one. Bishop Strickland in Tyler, Texas. There are a number of bishops in this country alone that could very well find the strength to say, you know what, I'm doing the same thing in my diocese. I know that I've got this politician who's promoting abortion, or this politician who's promoting Planned Parenthood, or whatever, and you, politician, are denied communion. And then on the other side, you're going to see Cupich and Wilton Gregory and all the hard left prelates start to say, oh, this is unfair, and we have to be pastoral in helping these people, and we have to accept everybody and all this stuff. So now we're going to see, like, there's a clash, right? So we've got conflict. I think this could be the spark to start the whole conflict.
I think so. I mean, while you could say that it's fine for bishops to have sort of a collegiality about, their brothers in Christ, so to speak. And that's fine. But at the same time, a bishop is really the prince of his own realm, his own diocese. And he should have the leadership to just stand up and say, like, hey, this is the church's teaching and this is how I'm enforcing it. And I don't have to go to the USCCB or somewhere else to get what my decisions are for my diocese. Like, I can be respectful of other people's decisions, but these are mine. And I think that that's what Cordileone is doing. And that's what he's saying. He's like, I think the other bishops will respect me, even if they don't agree with me, because they recognize he has the authority to say that. Even Cupich, etc. I agree. I think they're going to say some, some nasty things. But ultimately, what are they going to do? Like denounce him to Rome? I mean, what are they going to do to him? He's a bishop, he's a prince in his own realm. He has the authority to do what he's doing.
Right. And he's a young bishop. He's not old. He's one of the youngest in the country. I think he's just a little over 60. So he's got a lot of time before he has to hit that retirement age. So it's not like he can be forced into retirement. And what's more, because he's an archbishop, he's actually the metropolitan of his local area. And as the metropolitan, he doesn't have an archbishop sitting over top of him who's going to put his thumb on him and say, hey, you're kind of stepping out of line and I want you to step down or step aside or whatever. So even though an archbishop technically can't do that, it does happen in practice. He doesn't have that. He doesn't have that collegial pressure that's going to weigh down on him because of the nature of the fact that he's an archbishop, which, I mean, again, we do want to talk about this as a pastoral issue. We're trying to draw our soul back into Christ. But at the same time, there is a whole Pandora's box of political machinations that are coming to play within the church herself in relation to all of this. It's going to get messy.
Well, as you said, hopefully it helps embolden some bishops who have kind of been status quo for many years regarding the abortion issue within prominent members of their own dioceses. Maybe this will help embolden them to finally make a move. You know, it's so easy over the years. I really do think Americans in particular kind of suffer from we get outraged about something and then time goes by and then it's like back to business as usual.
Yeah.
And so I think that having a spark to really keep people going when they really shove it in your face. I think that's something he said, that it was really her just vociferous support for abortion that really drove him to it. You think about all those years where it was status quo, where he would reach out to her and say, hey, this is wrong, you shouldn't do it. But he never came close to denying her Holy Communion until she doubled down on it. And that's what's happening. I think it's going to really backfire on a lot of these woke corporations and everybody else who's been shoving things in people's faces. You're going to drive people to finally find their courage and take a stand.
Speaking of finding courage, let's talk about what's going on with the Supreme Court justices standing tall in the wake of this leak of the Alito decision regarding the Dobbs v. Casey decision. Justice Thomas came out earlier this week and said, if anybody thinks that this is going to change our minds, they don't understand how the Supreme Court works. Samuel Alito has also come out very strongly and said, we're not changing our minds. This is not going to change. All these protests and everything else aren't going to change our approach to how we, rule or come to a ruling from the bench. So I want to talk about what's going on with these with this leak and start by discussing just a little bit about the picketing that's going on outside their house. Now, a little bit of background you all probably already know, but in case you don't, when the decision was leaked at the beginning of May, somebody, and I don't know exactly who, but people on the left started doxing the Supreme Court justices by publishing their home addresses online and encouraging people to go to their homes. Some were even threatening violence against the families and against the justices themselves. I want to read to you Penal Code 18, paragraph 1507 of the U.S. Code, picketing or parading. And this is what it says. This was enacted September 23rd, 1950. Whoever, with the intent of interfering with, obstructing, or impeding the administration of justice, or with the intent of inflicting any judge, juror, witness, or court officer in the discharge of his duty, pickets or parades in or near a building housing a court of the United States, or in or near a building or residence occupied or used by such judge, juror, witness, or court officer, or with such intent uses any sound truck or similar device, or resorts to any other demonstration in or near any such building or residence shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year, or both. Nothing in this section shall interfere or prevent the exercise by any court of the United States of its power to punish for contempt. What are your thoughts on this particular code of the municipal code of the United States with regard to what's going on?
Well, I mean, it's clearly being violated by the protests outside the justice's home. And I mean, in such a clear indication of trying to influence the justice's opinions on things. I mean, that in and of itself, like intimidation of justices, that's crazy that that's even being allowed. We discussed this earlier, Merrick Garland, the attorney general, has finally come out and he's really condemning the protests and saying that the threats against any sort of government institutional officers is horrible and it's bad for our polity. But what has he really done about it other than speak some words? I mean, is he enforcing this statute that you just read from?
Well, the answer is absolutely no. Now, what's interesting is he's talked about how angry he is. Ooh, yes. I'm mad. I'm mad that you people are doing this. Well, you know what? As Attorney General, your job isn't to get mad. Your job is to actually enforce and enact the law. You're an officer of the law, not an officer of your own emotions. So Merrick Garland is failing to actually do his job when it comes to prosecuting these individuals. It's kind of funny because the definition of insurrection, I don't have the definition of insurrection right in front of me, but if you look at what these protesters are doing, they are threatening violence against these Supreme Court justices who are officers of the court and actually one of the three branches of the federal government. Isn't inciting violence against one of the branches of the United States government the very definition of insurrection?
You would think so. Although what's interesting is I'm pretty sure Merrick Garland made a statement that it was okay for people to go and protest at government buildings, meaning that he thinks the protesters should take their signs and picketing to the Supreme Court building, but that it was unlawful for them to go to private homes. So that's an interesting distinction to draw, that you can, show up on government buildings to protest, but not the homes. Again, though, he's not enforcing the statute. He's just saying, oh, you shouldn't do that, people, but without backing it up with any kind of action.
What's interesting about that is it seems to really fly in the face of something that he said with regard to the January 6th insurrection, which wasn't an insurrection. In January of this year, on January 6th of this year, I have an article here from lawfareblog.com, and it starts with this. Yesterday, on the eve of the first anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, and Attorney General Merrick Garland delivered a speech reviewing the Justice Department's efforts to investigate and prosecute those responsible for the attack on the Capitol. Quote, "The Justice Department remains committed to holding all January 6th perpetrators at any level accountable under law," he insisted, "whether they were present that day or were otherwise criminally responsible for the assault on our democracy." Now, these justices were appointed by the President of the United States and confirmed by the Senate. And so therefore, they are officers of the law, the third branch of the United States. There are threats of violence against them. Doesn't he have an obligation, even especially in light of what he said about these January the 6th protesters, to not only enforce the law, but to then track down anybody who's making threats?
Well, obviously there's a certain element of, this is for thee and not for me. I mean, my goodness, Chuck Schumer threatened Brett Kavanaugh on the steps, of the Supreme Court before, saying you better watch out, about what you do. Like, he was inciting a mob, right? To be angry against Kavanaugh, and most people would have just have called that political theater. They wouldn't have said he was trying to incite an insurrection against a branch of the government.
Oh, well, what's her name? Elizabeth Warren was out there going, I'm angry. I'm mad as hell. And she's going off about, and she actually incited these people to protest at the Supreme Court and to continue their protests. And one could even say that her words incited these protesters to then even commit further crimes by going into their churches and start protesting in their churches, which they did last weekend. They went into several churches last weekend, and there's now been a rash of violence and vandalism against Catholic churches because the Catholic Church has dared to take a stance against abortion. And now, obviously, the church is the bad guy, right?
Well, and the pro-life buildings that have been attacked too, firebombed, etc. Where is the investigation into those crimes, which
Right.
are actual crimes, not just threats, but they're actual crimes? Where is the federal investigations, into those sorts of crimes happening? Why aren't we hearing Merrick Garland talking ad nauseum about that? Well, because that's not in his what he wants, the political outcomes that he wants category.
Isn't it interesting? The left has a habit of taking the law and selectively enforcing aspects of it whenever it suits their agenda, without really taking a look at the law and saying, no, I am an officer of the law. I enforce the law as written, and regardless of my personal feelings on anything. Now they're selectively enforcing the law, and they've been doing this actually since Bill Clinton, when Clinton decided he wasn't going to enforce certain laws. So the Democrats have taken a cue from that, and they've just simply played that game ever since. I don't understand why those individuals haven't been impeached or removed from office, or have some sort of sanctions made against them because of their failure to actually enforce or do their duties as prescribed.
Well, I think it's precisely because, not to make it about a party affiliation, but we'll just say, I would say politicians are more inclined to enforce the law as written versus opponent. And so they're kind of like hesitation to use the law for political retribution almost in one sense emboldens Democrats and, just liberals of any stripe to go farther because nobody is reaching out and stopping them. But I think ultimately it's going to backfire on them. Well, what happens if you pass all these things and then you put a conservative president in office or a conservative speaker of the House or a conservative whatever? That's why they're so afraid about Roe v. Wade. It's like the court has a conservative majority. This is what they've been afraid of all these years, that finally conservatives will step up and start saying, well, no, you can't do this. The law doesn't allow you to do that. And that's what they're afraid of. They've been afraid of it for a long time. But I think their selective enforcement of the law ultimately over time makes especially young people cynical about the law. If it's going to be enforced for some and not for others, that will make you pretty cynical about respect for the laws of our nation, which I think that really erodes the fabric of what it means to be an American. And I know I've talked for a bit, but I actually have a quote from Abraham Lincoln that I think is, I have made my government students actually read this because I think it's important. He said, "Let reverence for the law be breathed by every American mother to the lisping babe that prattles on her lap. Let it become the political religion of the nation." Now, obviously, Lincoln's using some language that's a little strong. We don't want to have a political religion, but the idea that that's what unites us as Americans is the law, right? I mean, it's supposed to be applied equally and fairly to all. That used to, I think, connect Americans to each other in a way, like we know in our times right now, people that are feeling very like strong passions against each other. And I think some of it is because the law is not being enforced and treated with the respect that it deserves.
Right. Well, and one would argue, and I think it's been argued before, that the long history of the Roman Empire uh, its longevity has specifically to do with its adherence to the law. That everything that they did was about the rule of law. Um, Obviously, you've got Hammurabi's law, and you've got several other laws, Babylonian law, in the ancient world. But it really was that the Roman Empire itself was not built and predicated around the divinity of the king or it later devolved into that, but it wasn't built around this idea of the whims of the king or the whims of the emperor. It really was built around the rule of law that was established by the Senate. The plebes had a role in, kind of mitigating what the law does or what the structure of the law is, but everything was built around the law. And it was that rigorous application of law in the Roman Empire that precipitated its longevity and actually its growth and its building. Now, fast forward to where we are. In the United States, we've had a system of laws. We've built the country on law. We've had a constitutional law. And unfortunately, things have broken down very rapidly in the last 50 years. And I think that a lot of it has to do with this. Well, we can change the law. We can change the meaning of the law. We're going to change the words of the law. And then we're only going to selectively apply the law, which, as I already pointed out, Julian the Apostate did as well, which was part of the downfall of the Roman Empire itself. So I think that by way of analogy, and this could possibly be what Abraham Lincoln was talking about too, is that once you get away from the rule of law, then you start to acquiesce to the whims of either the people or some dictator. And at that point, the rule of law crumbles and the civilization falls with it. Don't you agree?
I think so. And I also think that the law, by its nature, because it is difficult to make and change laws if they're not built on political whims or aspirations of a leader, naturally make laws more conservative in nature, right? Difficult to enact, difficult to change. And I think it's because of that is why liberals have persistently used the courts as the means to push their progressive ideas, because they know it'll take too long and that it's difficult to change actual statutory laws on the books. You have to get what you want through the courts. And that, of course, is the biggest problem with Roe v. Wade. It overturned abortion laws across the nation. It was very unconstitutional to do so, to go against what the elected representatives of the people had enshrined into state law, and to have 7 men from the bench just, slap that down was very egregious breach, I would say, of the separation of powers as well. And I think that's actually what Alito and the others are saying. Hey, look, this wasn't our thing to do. It's not the role of the judiciary to adjudicate laws. Like, that's what the legislature is for. If you don't like the laws in your states, then go change your votes at the ballot box. That's the way it's supposed to work. But of course, liberals, that they're not patient enough to do that, or they know that it's much harder to sell, in the marketplace of ideas, their progressive ideas. It's a lot easier to get some judge to just force everybody to do it.
Sure, it's very difficult, I think, to start operating in the society and tell everybody that, hey, it's okay to actually murder some people. That's hard. That's difficult to convince a majority of people that you should change the law and make it allowable to commit murder or acts of violence against some set or subset of people, just because you want to make a profit on it or something along those lines. It seems to me that we actually fought a war in this country over that kind of idea. Do you think that maybe this decision, handing down this decision, falls into a pattern that very much reflects what happened in the lead up to the Civil War?
I do. I think that the Dred Scott versus Sanford case is very much like the Roe v. Wade. You know, like Roe v. Wade is our Dred Scott case, where the court made a decision that really like had a very deleterious effect going forward, both on the morality of the idea of slavery, and it just continued to inflame the passions. It also incidentally overturned all the local laws and customs that had been in place since really the implementation of the Constitution. It overturned the Northwest Ordinance, which had banned slavery in the territories. It overturned even Stephen Douglas's idea of popular sovereignty, wherein states could decide. Dred Scott basically said, no, states can't decide. You have to have slavery anywhere a master wants to bring his slaves. I mean, that's what Roe did in our country. It overturned the laws of the land in favor of this interpretation that a woman had a right to privacy and that she could end her child's life at her own discretion. So I definitely think that the two time periods are very linked in that respect. It's interesting though, because although we talked about this earlier, that Alito is basically saying, look, constitutionally speaking, it's not the court's purview to decide these things. He's not ruling on the morality of abortion. He's just saying it's not our place to make laws about it, and that's fair. It's interesting. Turning it back to the states is going to be a sticky widget too. I mean, that's, again, Abraham Lincoln absolutely sort of destroyed Stephen Douglas on this in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. He said, you know, you can't do that. You can't say, one state can't say, this is morally wrong, and then another state, no, it's right. Like, that kind of psychological disconnect is going to have ramifications down the line, and usually, unfortunately, violent ones. So
I find it fascinating. One of the things that you talked to me about a few nights ago about the Dred Scott decision, you were saying that the way that the judges rule, or I think it was the majority decision, the judge was saying, because this was brought to us as a property rights issue, they ruled on it as a property rights issue, which means that the entire decision was predicated on the definition of a slave, a human slave, as quote unquote property. And so as a property rights decision, the whole Dred Scott decision, as awful as it was ruled based on the way that the definition was being applied. I find that if Roe is to be overturned, the next step is to talk about the humanity and the personhood of preborn children, because if we are going to continue to talk about abortion, you know, it's, should we be allowed to have abortions here or abortions there? If you keep it on the topic of abortion without ever discussing the person, then getting what needs to be implemented in law is going to be a lot harder. Don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, when Jefferson was asked about the slavery issue and ending it, he said it would require, you know, quote, a revolution in public opinion in order for that to happen. And even Lincoln acknowledged that if you could eradicate slavery overnight, that wouldn't suddenly have an equality of the races, because a lot of whites, you know, looked upon the blacks as inferior. So even if you eradicate, even if we were able to eradicate abortion overnight, that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to have the mentality, right, that allows them to look at those babies as precious, unrepeatable, valuable human lives. Like, there has to be a revolution in the public opinion that we currently have about the humanity, the personhood of the babies, for sure.
So this actually goes back to what Archbishop Corleone said in his interview. He said something about how he wasn't really so much thinking about things in terms of making abortion illegal, or, you know, he wasn't really addressing that. He wanted to make it unthinkable, Now, I've heard that talking point before, and I agree that yes, we should make abortion unthinkable. But as you point out, I think that it has to go through making it illegal first in order for that to happen. Because as long as people are debating right to this or right to that without talking about the personhood of the individual who's being dismembered, we're never going to get to that point where we make it unthinkable. I think that the backwards thinking of some of these people, well, we have to make it unthinkable. They want to skip the step of making it illegal, but I think we have to go there first.
I mean, I agree because ultimately, like in public life, we have to have going, again, Lincoln said, we have to have that respect for the law. And if a law happens to be unjust, then let the people take the necessary steps to, undo it. But but yes, having the kind of the benchmark, right? That this is illegal. Let that be your starting place. And then you get to the, convincing people that it's unthinkable. And I think even Corleone acknowledged that making it illegal would be a huge step toward the unthinkable element of it. But that's ultimately, obviously, what we want. We don't want people following something for mere legality only, right? Like it works better when people love the law or when they think that, yeah, I'm doing this because it's the right thing and not because somebody's with a stick is forcing me to.
So Lisa Evers here in the comments section, I just saw the comment. I try to keep my eye in the comments and I don't always catch them, but this one caught my attention. She said, won't we need to do something about contraception also? As you and I both know, and we've talked about this extensively, contraception is the reason why we have abortion to begin with. Because once you start separating the marital act into two parts, which divorces part of it from the generation of children, which is actually the primary aspect of the marital act anyway, suddenly you make children a commodity or a product of conception as opposed to the person of the baby that they are. So yes, I think that we do need to talk about contraception. The question is, how do we go from a society where we have not just abortion, the idea that we can murder children, but we also have the idea that we can give hormone blockers to children, we can mutilate their genitals in order to make them appear to be the opposite gender of what they are. And we should then encourage them in all kinds of sexual vice. So, on and on and on. In order to get to the point where we have a proper rule of law, it seems to me that what we really need to do is focus on forcing definitions, real applicable legal definitions in law. I don't know how we can even get to some of these topics without forcing real legal definitions.
Well, the Republicans just introduced what they're either introducing in a committee to actually define a Women's Defense Act, where they define what a woman is.
No
so
kidding.
We'll see if it gets any traction. But going to her question on contraception, I would say that if Roe is overturned, I actually think that's why the liberals are really losing their minds about the possibility of it, because they know that if Roe was on shaky ground, which it most certainly was constitutionally, so is Griswold, so is gay marriage. Like there are a lot of things that suddenly look like they might have the supports kicked out from under them because they're not in the Constitution.
Right.
There are these judicial decisions that are, in terms of the United States history, are still fairly recent and therefore could possibly be overturned. And I think that's why they're really losing their minds.
I think that it's also interesting that all of this happened almost right on the heels of the consecration.
Yes.
The consecration took place, and then the next thing you know, suddenly Roe's about to be overturned. And now we're talking about all of these other things that could potentially happen in the wake of this. I mean, after a while, you start to wonder, is the spiritual, are we finally seeing spiritual fruits from the growth in daily rosaries, the growth in the first Fridays, or first Fridays, first Saturdays, and please God, the acceptance of the final consecration that took place just a month and a half ago. Do you think that we're actually seeing the spiritual fruits of this kind of thing?
I do. And I think that people, while they should feel gladdened by that kind of idea, like kind of like a boost in the arm there, don't let up though on the fasting and the prayers and the rosaries and the sacrifices. I think that, again, the biggest thing, especially for Americans, to avoid is that kind of complacency that always seems to creep in after the period of outrage dies down. It's like, no, don't become complacent. Like, God is giving us these little things to kind of boost our confidence, but to help us along, but not to let us slack down on the sacrifices. I mean, if we want to see real change in our country, that revolution in public opinion that Jefferson spoke of about slavery, I think we really need to step it up. We got to step up our game if we want to see these results kind of continue. But I do believe God is signaling that Mary is powerful indeed.
Well, as we look around the things that are taking place in the world at this point, I mean, the left is a screeching, howling mess at this point. Not only do they not have a plan for anything, we are seeing a massive increase in inflation rates. Gas prices are going through the roof. California, I don't know if you saw this, but California is now hitting $7 a gallon.
Oh, they're saying that might hit $6 a gallon by August nationwide. I mean,
$6 a gallon. I can't even wrap my head around $6 a gallon. I'm so used to gas being in the $1.80 range. That's what it was, growing up, and that's what it was all through college, and even up until just a few years ago. It was mostly around $1.80, $1.90. Now we're talking $6. That's nuts. But we're seeing a lot of the Democrats. They're howling about their reproductive rights, which really, come on, let's face it, it's the sacrament of the left is the murder and sacrifice of children. They're concerned about suddenly seeing their LGBTQ whatever rights eroded, and they're concerned about all these things that are starting to fall apart. We know that they're going to get slaughtered in the polls come November for the midterms. That is, unless, of course, monkeypox decides it's going to be the way that they cheat again. I don't know how that's going to happen, but I don't know.
Yeah, but that's right. That they know it too. They know they're going to lose. And that's why they have nothing to lose, right? That's why they can screech and yowl, because they're just going to pull out all the stops. And that's why I said, like, this is not a time for people of a conservative bent to, slack off of, pressing the fight, press the fight back to them. I mean, spiritually and politically. Like, people who are in politics should be only emboldened to go further, because you've got them where you want them, really. Like, they know they're going to lose too. There's no way around that. But they're going to lose their minds this summer. So we should be prepared for that, not surprised by it, but just ready to respond.
I agree. I think that ultimately what we have to do is make sure that we hold the line. Isn't that what they always say? Hold the line. Take a step forward, hold the line. Take another step forward, hold the line. Don't yield. They're not going to, not unless they get routed, and that could very well be on the way. So please God, the left and the agenda of the culture of death is finally going to be meeting the heel of Our Lady very soon.
Yes, that is definitely the hope we have.
So there we go for this evening. So Sheila Lyons asks, Michael and Alyssa, who's watching the kids? Do you have a large St. Bernard keeping an eye on them?
German Shepherd.
German Shepherd. She's shepherding them very Germanly. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for this evening. I want to thank my beautiful and intelligent and lovely bride for coming on the show this evening. And all of you, please send me emails. Tell me how much you enjoyed having Alyssa on the show, and I will share them with her. And hopefully with enough encouragement, we can get her back on the program and make her a little bit more regular. I would love to keep her on the show because I think that she just keeps the conversation going. I love that. So we'll go ahead and close this evening with our prayer. In nomine Patris, et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Our Lady of Victory.
Pray for us.
In nomine Patris, et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right. God bless you all, and we will see you next week.